So we're going back on stage again. We're going to be live in the Cork Opera House on March 30th for a very special event, which is going to form part of the Cork Podcast Festival. Our show is called Look Who's Talking. It's going to be all about those criminals. How do we get them into studio? How do we get up close and personal with them? And what have they got to say when the cameras are off? So Cork Opera House, tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie, 30th of March. See you there.
So the end of January marked the 20th anniversary of the murder of Shaun Duffy in County Donegal, and the Garda released a statement asking for witnesses to come forward and help them in the investigation. Eimear, can you tell us a little bit about who Shaun Duffy was and sort of the circumstances around his death?
Yeah, so Shaun Duffy was a 36-year-old man. He was a bachelor, so he was living alone in the Dungloe area in Donegal. And he worked kind of as an undertaker. He worked as a mechanic, so he was well known in the area and his family were well known. And basically he was found dead in his house on a weekend day by his brother. He'd been last seen the night before. He was socialising with family and friends in a pub in Donegal for his younger brother's birthday. And he was found dead. His mother basically wasn't able to contact him the next morning, and his brother went to the house and found him there. And it was an extremely shocking, violent death. There was a lot of injuries suffered by Mr. Duffy. So I guess clearly it's 20 years on and the Garda are still investigating it, but there's been various rumours and various different lines of inquiries over the year, but it's still one of those ones that is essentially mystery. This 36-year-old man living alone, found in extremely violent circumstances, and you know, they've obviously issued the appeal in the 20th anniversary, but for his family, like, the nightmare has continued.
Yeah, and he had been out that evening prior to his murder with his friends and family. It was, like you said, it was his brother's birthday. His brother Kevin, who was 18, he actually was the one who found him deceased the following morning. So there's a bit of detail there around his mother's home was only 500 yards away from his house, and he'd gone back to his mother's house. I think a few of them had gone back. They got some pizza in a cafe on the way home. They went back, they had a drink and a bit of crack. And then he decided, I'm going to bed. He went home to his own home around 2:30 in the morning. And he, again, like I said, he was living there alone, but he had lived there with his grandmother up until she had died. He was then attacked and wounded in his home in the early hours of the 29th. So his brother Kevin, the one who had just turned 18, went to the house at just before 2:30, where he found his older brother's body. Can you tell us a bit about the circumstances surrounding how exactly he was found?
Yeah, so basically he was discovered in the sitting room of his home. He was like face down on the couch, and I have to say he's 6'4" as well. So, you know, he was a big man. So I suppose if you can imagine that sight that you're confronted with, you know, he's face, his hands, his clothes were covered in blood, and there was a lot of wounds to his body. He was stabbed several times. There was also a crossbow arrow lodged into his arm, and I think we were just saying that earlier, the inquest later suggested that they weren't sure if he was shot with the crossbow or if that just happened to be lodged into his arm by his attacker. He owned the crossbow, but there's obviously caused a lot of injury as well. And he there was no other weapons found in the area, but, you know, he clearly died from this injury, from these stab injuries. I think there was a significant injury to the back of his head, the inquest later found as well. So just an extremely violent death and a shocking scene to be confronted with, really.
Yeah, and he said, his brother had said that he sort of, when he found him, that there was, you know, considerable blood spray on the walls. He said that his brother was, you know, in the inquest it was said that he had loads of defensive wounds on his hands. So clearly he fought his attacker or attackers. He had a purple finger, and it was, you know, suggested that he might have punched somebody kind of in a fight. Now, when he was out earlier that evening, his family said that he hadn't been sort of in any sort of fights with anybody. He was calm. He was in great form, as they said. And he was kind of known to be somebody who had a kind of a snap temper, you know, a quick temper, but he was often always also described as somebody who was kind to the elderly and often visited his elderly neighbours. And he was very well known around the Dungloe area and in the Rosses. He was actually a neighbour of Gay Byrne. Gay Byrne apparently had a home down there and sort of knew him all his life as he was a child and that. So there was no other weapons found in the area. Was there anyone ever arrested in connection with this?
No, there wasn't. there hasn't been really. I suppose it's one of those cases that it's kind of has, because of the lack of activity. Obviously, it's a live Garda investigation. The case has always remained open in Ireland, but there has been, not a lot of activity in terms of, with the public. So this 20th anniversary appeal has obviously got it back into the public sphere, but, there hasn't been any arrests that we're aware of. And I guess, with so many other things happening, it is probably a good opportunity to maybe try and get this like memories jogged for people, because it is a shocking case. We also should say that the house was ransacked as well. So, not only was he violently assaulted and the scene was horrific, there was also an attempt to make it look like a burglary, but I think the Gardaí have since ruled that out. There was also, Kevin, his brother, had dropped someone else home and didn't come across any cars in the area near Mr. Duffy's house. So there's just a lot of different, I suppose, strands to the investigation that are still raising a lot of questions to this day. And then just in terms of, I suppose, the Garda activity, there hasn't been any arrests, but there's been a lot of rumours over the years. Like Mr. Duffy was believed to have been a suspect in assaults. We know that I think just before his murder, he had asked his mother, could he use her sitting room he was conducting an interview with a Garda. So we assume that it's in relation to that. He, as you said, he was known to have a short temper. There was also various different rumours about, did he sort of get on the wrong side of more serious criminal elements in the area? So there has been a lot of sort of theories and rumours, but in terms of what we're actually dealing with, in fact, there hasn't been any definite line of inquiries that we're aware of anyway.
And his mother said at the inquest that before his death he was living in fear. She said that he had he always locked the doors. She said often if she went into the home in the middle of the day or whatever it might be and he was in bed, she wouldn't be able to clean because he always had that door locked. She also said that she did clean the house for him, but she was never allowed into his bedroom. And also that he was somebody who, if somebody came to the door and knocked on the door, with that fear he had for his life, he'd always look out the window and either answer the door or he would, not answer the door. Obviously, if there was somebody on the other side he didn't want to see. But there was a suggestion that perhaps the killers had been lying in wait in the house for him, considering that the doors were locked, and also the fact that had he seen somebody he didn't want to maybe communicate with, he would have seen them outside the door beforehand. The inquest also heard that he had no drugs or alcohol in his system at the time. But tell us a little bit about the inquest itself. So the judge told the jury that they had to come back with a verdict of unlawful killing, and he said that they shouldn't conclude murder because they couldn't prove that there was an intent to kill there, which obviously is required for the commission of a murder. What else was said at that inquest?
So the inquest was in 2007, and it was basically heard about the injuries he suffered. So there was a large tear to the back of his head. It was like nearly 15 centimetres in depth or in length. Obviously that contributed to his death. They weren't able to say what kind of weapon was used, but we do know that he had stab wounds as well. There was 9 wounds to his body. The cause of death was trauma to his head. I was heard as well just about his family circumstances, that he was the second eldest of 8 children. And as you were talking about his mother saying he was living in fear, she did say Shaun had a lot of enemies down through the years as well. So I suppose the inquest, as you said, did return a verdict of unlawful killing, which basically just means that, he died extremely violently and it was he was killed. But I suppose it leaves so many more questions to be answered. And, the Garda investigation still continues, but, there's a lot of, I think there's a long way to go before we know if there's going to be any kind of justice served in this case, I guess. I suppose we have to say as well, I was reading earlier about different theories around his death, and there was, neighbours had reported hearing a shout as well. So, we don't know, maybe as you said, was his killers lying in wait? And it does kind of seem like something that was, he'd come home late, very late in the night on his own. And, he was found in a really, there was a violent state around, and it was extremely violence that he was found dead in. So I suppose it would suggest that maybe there was some kind of targeted behaviour there. But, it's, I suppose the investigation remains wide open still.
And he was, I suppose, in a very vulnerable position as well, coming in at 2:30 in the morning, maybe after some drink was taken.
Yeah.
He was described in some of the earlier news reports as somebody who sort of had a finger in many pies. He worked at lots of different things. He was an undertaker. He was a mechanic. I seen that he had worked as a doorman. There's a very famous sort of Rose de Tralee-esque pageant that happens in Dungloe called the Mary of Dungloe, and he had worked as a doorman at that. He had been an escort at that. He was somebody who was really well known. He was into motor racing and horse sales, and that sort of comes back around to the fact that his mother said he had a lot of enemies. I mean, it's a very small community in Dungloe.
Yeah.
It's even the priest during his funeral service had mentioned something, along the lines of hinting that the killer may be among the congregation, that it was probably somebody in the community. So it is a very small community, and I suppose the Gardaí, they released an appeal, and we have some video of that, so we'll show that now in a minute.
Yeah.
But they had said that it was time now for people to come forward and give their valuable information, because with the passage of time, that people might be now in a better position to provide the information that at the time they may have, previously felt like they couldn't bring forward.
Of course, yeah. And like as you said, it's an extremely small knit community. It's a beautiful part of the country. Extreme violence was used on him, and maybe he had, fell foul of certain people, but nobody deserves to meet their end that way. You have a family who are grieving 20 years on, who don't have any sense of justice or answers, and the guards are obviously have a lot of different inquiries that they're looking at as well. So, it does kind of almost seem a bit like a horror, like a horror movie or something, with, these fingers of blame being pointed at certain different areas. It's a small knit community. It's been torn apart by this shocking crime, and it kind of, it's just all of the rumors that we've heard. It's just, you just kind of think, there has to be some way of finding out what happened to this man. Like it's quite it's just quite disturbing when you think about it. Like the 20 years has passed, and that he was living alone, and there's just still no sense of justice for the family. I suppose it's quite it must be very hard for them as well. We have to think about that too.
Yeah, let's listen to some of that Garda appeal.
Shaun was a local man who lived in a bungalow at Meaney Cross just outside Dungloe. He was a 36-year-old bachelor who was well known in the area. Shaun worked as an undertaker and a mechanic. He had an interest and involvement in motor racing and horse sales. Shaun had been socialising in the Strandview bar in Mahary on Friday the 28th of January 2005. It was his younger brother Kevin's birthday, and Shaun was there with friends and family. After the pub, Shaun continued to socialise at his mother's house in Meaney Cross, Dungloe, and returned to his own home at approximately 2:30 a.m. Shaun was attacked and fatally wounded in his home at Meaney Cross, Dungloe, County Donegal, in the early hours of Saturday the 29th of January 2005. His body was discovered in his home shortly before 2:30 p.m. that afternoon. The solving of this murder continues to be a priority for Garda Síochána. The investigation team at Milford Garda Station would like to thank those who have offered valuable information or assistance to the investigation to date. With the passage of time, some people may now be in a position to provide information to investigating Gardaí that they could not provide at the time. Or maybe a person who did provide information previously may now be in a position to provide further information. My colleagues and I continue to appeal for information in this case, and believe that a number of people have yet to come forward who may now be in a position to assist in bringing those responsible to justice. I ask anyone with information to please contact Milford Garda Station on 074 915 3060 or the Garda confidential line 1800 666 111. Any information received will be treated with absolute confidentiality. Thank you.
So also in January, there was an appeal in relation to Sandra Collins' murder. And also Jojo Dullard, again, another unsolved murder, has, come back to the fore this month, given that it was her birthday, her 51st birthday. Tell us a little bit about that Sandra Collins appeal.
So basically Sandra Collins, she disappeared in December 2000. So she's her 24th anniversary happened obviously just before Christmas, but her brother and sister appeared on Crime Call. It was a very moving interview, and they basically just talked about how they were such close friends and the devastation that they've experienced over the last 24 years. It's obviously going into the 25th year of her disappearance now, and they were basically just again appealing for anybody. The Gardaí in their appeal before Christmas also spoke about maybe changing loyalties, maybe situations have changed for people and that, they can now come forward and feel safer to speak. So I suppose they were just trying to reiterate this, but the basics of this disappearance is that, Sandra was 28 and she disappeared in Clodagh in County Mayo, which is another small knit community on the west coast there. And she had bought groceries earlier in the day, but she was last seen outside a takeaway in the town. And some of the shopping. So later on then a fleece was discovered on a pier, and the fleece was obviously belonging to Sandra. And inside the fleece were sausages that she'd bought earlier in the shop. So it kind of suggested that this wasn't anything planned. This obviously her disappearance was, had been, it just suggested how unplanned her disappearance was, I suppose. And she was one of 6 siblings, and she had grown up just outside Crossmolina in County Mayo. So I suppose in the appeal, the brother and sister were just talking about they want to give her a burial, they want to reunite her with her parents and other family members, and they're just desperate for closure at this point.
And obviously, if you're going to disappear at your own volition, you're not going to leave your fleece behind.
That's what I mean.
Middle of December.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
And Jojo Duller, like you mentioned there, in terms of the appeals for, with these cold case investigations, Gardaí often do say loyalties may have changed. Time has passed. With the passage of time, people that weren't in position to give information then might be to now, and they're appealing to their conscience and their better judgment to actually come forward with this information. And earlier the end of last year, there was an arrest in the Jojo Duller case, and nothing ever came of that. But it was her 51st birthday as well at the end of January.
Yeah, and I think the Jojo Duller, I don't know why it's always struck a chord at me, but like it's one of those ones where you just really, really feel for the family. Like, so they've had to fight this battle since she disappeared in 1995 on her way home to Kilkenny from Dublin. She missed the last bus and she hitchhiked several times until she disappeared outside Moon. She'd been at a telephone box and she told her friend Mary that she'd gotten the lift and she hasn't been seen since. So basically this has been an ever-ending nightmare for the family, and they've had ups and downs over the years. One of her older sisters, Mary Feeling, she was the real instrument in advocating for missing people and died there a few years ago. So that was obviously tragic for the family. And in the post this week, they actually referenced Mary and basically said how, that they visit Mary's grave and Jojo's parents' grave in order to kind of pay their respects to Jojo as well. But they just want to be able to bring it to an end. And, they spoke about how they don't reference who's signed off in the post, but she has an older sister, Kathleen, and other brothers as well. And they basically said, when we heard that, the man was expecting again, we were so excited. And they're just speaking about how, they're thinking of her on her birthday. It was earlier in the week. She would have been 51, as you said. But I guess it just hammers home how, these stories move in and out of the news cycle. But, for the family, it just continues. And they would have had their hopes up there before Christmas with a dig. And there was a person of interest that was arrested, but he was released without charge, and nothing of, I think they said, the dig helped with their inquiries, the Gardaí, but there was nothing of evidential value found in relation to Jojo. So they had also on the same, this is a Facebook page where the birthday tribute was posted. So they had, before Christmas, posted on the same Facebook page just talking about their devastation that they weren't able to bring her home. They wanted to bring her home for Christmas. So that's another kind of murder. These are missing women, but also murder investigations that, the guards are very active on, but, there's still probably a long way to go.
Yeah, because of course with a murder investigation, the Gardaí have a lot more time and resources and a lot more powers for, arrest and search and things like that. But tell us about, I suppose, why these cases would have been upgraded from, because they were initially missing people and they were, very recently, in the case of Jojo Dullard anyway, very recently upgraded to a murder case. How would they kind of get that over the line?
Yeah, I suppose in these cases, it's a length of time. So, but you basically have to have information that this person cannot possibly be alive. So, there might be like, there's been no activity on bank accounts. There's been no sight or sound of this person. And then also, evidence to suggest that this person has met a violent end. So I suppose always has been a suspicion with Jojo in particular, who was hitchhiking home, that she was, she met a violent end because of the circumstances that, she didn't arrive home and nobody had heard of her, and there was no explanation. Obviously, no kind of personal information has been accessed in relation to her over the years. And the same with Sandra Collins as well. There was obviously was at one stage a suspect in that case, and so the Gardaí had upgraded the case in that direction. That has since gone the other way. But I suppose it's basically when they have information to suggest that this person cannot possibly, based on their investigations, be alive, and then in order to upgrade it, then when they do upgrade it, they basically are given more, I suppose, instruments of the state, so they can go in and search people. So they can get warrants, go in and search areas. They can put certain information to people. They have more Gardaí on the case. So and even in the Jojo Dollar case, it was interesting that we spoke to Alan Bailey, who's a former Garda in the cold case unit, and he spoke about how they had actually spoken to this person of interest who was recently arrested in the Jojo case, but back then, he had just come forward to say he had seen her close to when she disappeared, but they, at that stage, it was a missing persons case, and he wasn't, he was someone that they were interested in, but he was more helping with inquiries. So, they wouldn't have had the powers then to go and actually arrest somebody, to go and do any searches, whereas since they upgraded the case, they're obviously dealing with a much wider, I suppose, options in terms of investigations, and they can go in and they can carry out, they had basically dug up, we've seen the pictures that were in the Sunday World of, the trenches. It was like 6 foot deep, 5 foot wide trenches that they dug up in relation to the Jojo search. So, you need a murder investigation to be live to do things like that. And we've seen that in the disappearance of the young boy, Kyron Durnan, as well last year. That case is obviously still active, but he was only missing, he's been missing for about 2 years, but they were again basically able to, based on information that they'd obtained, based on their investigations, they were like, we don't believe that there's possible that a boy of this age could still be alive. So and
there's something very interesting happened with that case recently, in terms of they were able to kind of deduce that he may have been died after a certain date because of takeaway receipts. Ken Foy was reporting in the Irish Independent actually that they basically had forensic Gardaí go in and, they're obviously trying to find a pinpointed date in relation to Kyron, because that's the issue, because he was last seen in May 2022 attending a school, and then the school were told that he was going to be go to a different school, so it didn't flag. And then 2 years later, then there was a flag with Tusla as well that, that nobody had actually been able to identify this child in 2 years. So they were trying to track, and I suppose you had a wide field then within 2 years to find out when was the when did he disappear? So I suppose there's been a lot of that kind of work where you're like really meticulous going to check all of this kind of information, and they were able to look into regular takeaways that Kyron and his family had been using, and were able to basically pinpoint a point when the order had reduced. So it's fascinating. It's also incredibly sad, I suppose, but it is fascinating because it basically suggests that, they're all of this stuff is, I suppose, it's investigations work. It's, what's that word? It's not, it's sorry, I'm trying to think of that word, where it's research, and it's basically, it's not DNA evidence or anything like that, but circumstantial
evidence. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to find. So, it's basically suggests that, if this boy is missing and this order has reduced at this point and continued to be the case, then, does that suggest that that's when he went missing? And they did release a photograph a few months ago as well, which suggests that maybe they believe that it was possibly one of the last sightings of Kyron. It was June, so it was just a month after he was believed to have left school. So they kind of traced it back to then, but it's still nearly 2 years, without any sighting of him. But yeah, the takeaway angle is interesting, but I suppose it just shows the kind of level that these investigations need to be at, and it's for all cases of missing people when you don't have a body and you have people telling you lies. So you need to use any kind of tool at your disposal. And I suppose it's very clever policing, but I guess they know more than us in terms of investigations. And
definitely is very clever policing.
Yeah.
Well, if we've updates on any of those, we will come back to you. And Eimear, thank you very much.
Thanks, Clodagh.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.